Chapter 26 Washed Up on the Rocks. The clip-clop of hooves punctured the silence as 4 ponies and 1 dragon trekked along a narrow, winding dirt path. The sun was well past its peak and already beginning to set, leaving them with only another hour or 2 of sunlight. Luckily, they didn't have much further to go before they reached Hoofington. Ugh, Rainbow Dash groaned. We've been walking for forever. How much longer is it going to be? She reached a hoof to her side and gingerly touched her bandaged wing, wincing slightly from the contact. My wing is freaking killing me. Oh, quit your whining, Rainbow Dash. We've only just begun walking, Rarity said, tossing her mane. If you're going to whine about anything, it should be this dreadful humidity. She pulled a section of her mane down and frowned. It's absolutely ruining my coiffure. She released her mane, letting it bounce back into place. Normally well kept and brushed to perfection, Rarity's luscious violet mane was getting frizzier by the second. She sighed, mumbling. It took hours to get just so. Rare's right for once, Applejack added, while using her hat to fan herself. We ain't been walking longer than a few minutes, maybe 30 tops. Sides, she said, squinting up at the sun. We still got a ways to go. She placed her hat back on her head, tilting it down a bit. I just can't believe it's still so hot. Ain't it supposed to get cooler as the sun goes down? Rainbow Dash rolled her eyes. Okay, first off, I wasn't whining. I was just saying that my wing, which is probably broken by the way, was hurting. That's all. Second, I thought it was just me that noticed how hot it was. I kind of thought I was imagining things. She used her good wing to wash cool air over herself while simultaneously and accidentally making Rarity's mane even more frizzy. Rainbow! Rarity cried, clutching her mane in a desperate attempt to keep it from being blown even more out of control than it already was. Stop that this instant. Oops, Rainbow chuckled, tucking her wing back against her side. My bad. It's just so hot, you know. Twilight, who had been silent up to that point, keeping her eyes forward but her head in the clouds, said, Yes, it does seem abnormally hot, especially for the time of day and how far north we are. She'd been lost in her own thoughts for the last half hour or so, but was still able to keep one ear on the conversation. Twilight glanced at Spike, who was on her back, and said, Any ideas what might be causing this, Spike? Spike looked taken aback. Do I have any ideas? He said incredulously. I thought you were the brains around here. I have a few ideas of my own, yes, but I want to know what you think, Spike, Twilight replied, not a hint of amusement in her voice. Spike raised an eyebrow. But why? Because, Spike, I'm not always going to be here to help. You're going to have to figure these things out for yourself eventually. So, I'm hoping that you can get some practice while I still am here to help, Twilight said softly. She looked around at her friends, who all gave her smiles as she looked at them. This journey could be dangerous, Spike. Really dangerous. And there's no telling what might or could happen. If something happens and we all get separated, I need to know that you can think for yourself and to do things without me or any of us here to help you. Spike was silent for a moment. Twilight, he said slowly, why are you being so serious all of a sudden? Twilight gave a little sigh. It's just, she trailed off. She's just worried about Chizal, Spike, Applejack jumped in, sensing Twilight's trepidation. You ain't exactly had the toughest life so far, she continued, but that may change soon. She placed a hoof on his head, giving him a loving noogie. Far as I can tell, we're heading pretty far north, and that ain't going to be any easier as we go. And while I'm sure getting separated is the last thing Twilight would want, the possibility of that happening is, unfortunately, a bit higher than normal. Spike frowned. I can take care of myself, he said indignantly. I may only be a baby dragon, but I'm just as brave as you are, Rainbow Dash. He puffed out his chest, putting his arms akimbo. Applejack smiled despite herself, patting him on the head. I must say, Rarity said, for a baby dragon, Spike is quite mature. Why, just earlier today, Spike made a slicing motion with his claw at his throat and then put an invisible zipper across his mouth. Rarity frowned. She sighed. If you're not going to tell them, then I will. You should be proud, not ashamed. Twilight's ears perked up. She turned her head to look at Rarity. Tell us what? What did Spike do? Rarity gave Spike a doe-eyed look. He bit his lip, then sighed. All right, fine. Spike hopped off Twilight's back and walked ahead a few paces. He turned back to the group and said, "Remember earlier when Rarity said that I had an accident?" All of them except for Rarity nodded. Well, he scratched the back of his neck nervously, kicking his feet against the dirt. It was less of an accident and more of a failure, he continued. You see, I was trying to breathe fire, real fire, and I ended up doing it. Sort of. It was simply wonderful, Rarity said, picking up where Spike had left off. It was a little less controlled, perhaps, than I'm sure he would have liked, but it was spectacular nonetheless. Her eyes went starry as she recounted the incident. Oh, the flames were so gorgeous. They were brilliantly green, sort of like a polished emerald, darker than his normal flames, and so deceptively hot. It was only for a second or two, but my little Spiky Wikey's fire was hot enough to melt a bit of rock. Yeah, and almost you with it, Spike said, casting his eyes downward. I'm really sorry, Rarity. I could have really hurt you. Rarity waved a hoof dismissively. Oh, pish-posh, it was marvelous, Spike, and I'm honored that I was the first pony to see it. It's not every day that you get to see a dragon's first flame. Twilight smiled widely. Oh my gosh, Spike, that's so great. Why didn't you tell me that you could breathe fire? Well, it's not exactly like I've tried that before today. Or ever, he said. I didn't even know how I could do it. Besides, it's not like it actually worked. I mean, it sort of did, but I nearly burned Rarity's face last time I tried, so I didn't want anyone to find out, and I told her not to tell you guys. Twilight took a few steps forward and wrapped a hoof around Spike's shoulder, pulling him in for a hug. Oh, Spike, she said softly. I'm just glad no one got hurt, and I'm really proud of you. This is a big accomplishment. Yeah, and freaking awesome, Rainbow Dash shouted. Dude, Spike, you're totally a real dragon now. I mean, you can breathe fire and everything. She caught herself. Well, maybe you don't have the wings yet, but still. She walked over to Twilight and Spike and gave the little dragon a playful punch in the shoulder. Awesome stuff, Spiky boy. Applejack joined in too, and gave Spike a pat on the back, saying, Land's sake, Sugar Cube, you really are becoming a bona fide dragon, ain't you? Shoot, I'm prouder than a rattlesnake with a shiny new rattling tail. Rarity flashed Spike a dazzling smile. See, she said, waving a hoof around, did I not say that they would be proud? Spike blushed, turning away. Twilight suddenly clapped her hooves together as if struck by a sudden thought. Ha! I just realized what's causing this heat. Oh? All three of the other ponies said in unison. Back when I first got Spike, I read a ton of books on the growth cycles of dragons because I wanted to know what I would have to look for as he matured. Now, I don't remember everything, but I do recall reading something about what a dragon's first flame does to his body. Normally, when Spike has breathed fire before, it's only been to send letters to Celestia, but those weren't real flames. They're like the difference between a pond and an ocean. One is a short burst of flame that comes from the dragon's lungs and is only a fraction of the magical strength of a normal flame, and the other comes from the dragon's heart. The fire spills out from a nearly limitless font and is far more powerful, hotter than any fire in Equestria, and with more magical properties than even a unicorn's horn. Twilight took a deep breath, having said all of that very quickly. She looked around at her friends, but none of them seemed to grasp the significance of what she had said. So, she continued, that means Spike has finally had his first heart flame, and now that he has, his body knows that it's time to start heating up so he can produce more fire for longer periods of time. That first flame was like the pilot light in your oven, and now his body is just pouring more gas in so that his heart can act like a furnace, providing Spike with a massive amount of firepower. Of course, that takes years and years to complete. Right now, he'll probably only be able to manage fire breathing for a few seconds at maximum. But still, that's incredible, Spike. Applejack, Rarity, Spike, and Rainbow Dash stared wide-eyed at Twilight. What? You remember all that from a book you read when you were just a filly? Rainbow Dash asked, shaking her head slowly. Twilight cocked her head to the side. You mean you don't remember the books you read as a kid? Well, like, not that much detail. Twilight shrugged her shoulders. Well, in any case, at least we've discovered the source of this mysterious heat, and now that we have, I know how to fix it. You do? Applejack asked. I thought this was just a natural process. Twilight nodded. It is, but you can stop the heat from emanating from Spike without stopping his heart from heating up. So how do we do that, Twi? Spike asked, rubbing his chest. Because I'm starting to feel a bit hot myself. Oh, that's easy. We just need to find you some nice cold ice water to drink, and that should help cool you down, Twilight said happily. Might be easier said than done, Sugar Cube, Applejack said. I ain't seen any rivers or lakes since we left Nadir's hut. She held up a hoof to her brow and scanned the horizon. Yep, I don't see much of nothing here. Rainbow Dash fluttered her good wing frustratedly. I would go look, but, you know. She awkwardly tried to move her injured wing, causing herself to wince in pain again. Dang, I gotta stop doing that, she mumbled. Oh, Twilight said suddenly. That reminds me. She flipped open her left side saddlebag and fished out the medicine that Nadir had given her. Handing it over to Rainbow Dash, she said, Nadir gave me that to me. She said it should help your wing heal, and I assume make you feel better. Rainbow Dash eyed the odd paste and dried weed suspiciously. I guess I don't have much of a choice, huh? She gulped. Well, bottoms up. Tossing the dried plants into her mouth, she chewed them quickly, grimacing as the no doubt bitter plants worked their way down her throat. Swallowing, she stuck her tongue out in disgust. Her eyes fell on the sickly green paste. I'm not sure I can eat that, she said. I don't think you're supposed to, Twilight said, stifling a chuckle. It looks like some kind of salve. It's likely supposed to be applied topically to a localized area. Rainbow Dash cocked an eyebrow. Twilight groaned. Just rub it all over your wing. Rainbow Dash perked up. Ah, cool. She held the paste awkwardly in one hoof as she tried to smear it over her bandaged wing, but managed to only messily smear it along her side. Whoops. Applejack shook her head, laughing. Careful now, Dash. Don't hurt yourself. I'll do it for you. She used her hoof to scrape as much of the green goop as she could from Rainbow Dash's fur and used her mouth to carefully unwrap the Pegasus' bandaged wing. She gave Rainbow a stern, yet comforting look. Look here, Rainbow, she said. This is going to hurt a mite, but try and keep still, okay? Rainbow Dash nodded, biting her lip. As delicately as she could, Applejack pulled Rainbow Dash's wing out, stretching the thin membrane around her wing and spreading the individual feathers apart. Rainbow Dash stifled a yelp, torturing her lip. Just hurry up, please, she groaned. Applejack ignored her, or couldn't answer because she had Rainbow's wing in her mouth. Using the hoof with the mossy paste on it, she began to spread it between the blue feathers as gently as she could. Once the majority of it had been thoroughly rubbed in, Applejack let go of Rainbow's wing. It stayed splayed out as Rainbow grimaced again, unable to pull it back to her side. Heh, she chuckled, wincing. Little help here? Applejack chuckled along with her. Sorry, Sugar Cube. Let me help you with that. She placed her hooves on Rainbow's wing, pushing it to her side. Then, grabbing the used bandages, she rewrapped it, pulling the wrappings as tight as she could without causing Rainbow Dash more harm than necessary. Satisfied, she gave a nod. There you go. All done. Thanks, Rainbow said, smiling. She flapped her uninjured wing happily. I'm feeling a little better already. I guess that stuff works fast, huh? Nadir told me that you'd be back to normal in a few days, Twilight said. She had watched Applejack apply the ointment, studying it as she rubbed it in. It was difficult to say without running a few tests, but the paste, whatever it was, seemed to have some intrinsic magic to it. She could have sworn she saw it melting into Rainbow's feathers and fur as it was applied. In any case, I'm glad you're feeling better, Rainbow. Just be careful and try not to move that wing too much. As long as it stays mostly still, I think you'll be fine. Spike tapped Twilight on the shoulder, trying to get her attention. So, anyway, he said, dragging out the so far longer than necessary, about that water. Twilight's eyes lit up. Oh, right, water. She looked past Spike into a clearing up ahead a ways. She frowned. I'm not 100% sure, but if I'm remembering right, there should be a small lake just past that clearing up there. She picked Spike up with a violet cloud of magic and placed him on her back. It's not too far, and once we get there, it'll only be a short walk from Hoofington. Come on, girls, she said, motioning to her friends. Thanks, Celestia, Rainbow muttered. I need something to wash the taste of this disgusting stuff out of my mouth. It feels like I ate rotting hay. She stuck her tongue out. Ugh. Applejack chuckled again. It didn't take them very long to reach the lake, and as they approached it, both Spike and Rainbow's eyes became excited. The lake was a deep blue and a bit murky, but to the pair of suffering friends, it was like an oasis in the desert. It was surrounded by a thin shoreline peppered with rocks and random detritus. A log here, a soggy leaf there. But on the far end of the lake, just a little too far to clearly make out, was something that looked a little different from the rest of the flotsam and jetsam. It was bone white, and in a small pile that looked eerily like stacked ribs. Of course, Rainbow Dash and Spike were far too preoccupied with the refreshing-looking water to be bothered by something as foreboding as that. "Man, in retrospect," Spike remarked as he leapt from Twilight's back and rushed over toward the water's edge, "it was really dumb not to bring any water with us. Seems like a big epic adventure 101. "Yeah," Rainbow Dash agreed. "Really not the greatest planning on your part, Twi." Twilight would have rolled her eyes if she had heard them, but she was too busy paying attention to the disturbance on the lake's surface. She saw ripples and something ducked under the lake, just in time to not be seen. She crinkled her muzzle in concentration. "What is it, Twilight?" Rarity asked, following Twilight's line of sight. "Spot something, Sugar Cube?" Applejack asked, also following the invisible line from the middle of the lake. Twilight shook her head. "No, it's probably nothing," she said. "Just some fish, I'm sure." Completely oblivious to any possible danger, Spike and Rainbow Dash raced toward the water, laughing as they ran. Twilight, Rarity, and Applejack, staying a little further back, waited as Twilight kept her eyes trained on the water. She narrowed her eyes, something in her gut telling her not to look away. "Either you saw something, or you're really interested in this lake, Twi," Applejack said, pursing her lips. "And I'm betting it ain't the latter." Twilight, without looking away from the lake, responded, "I don't know, but I've just got this really weird feeling like something bad is about to happen. Of course, that's ridiculous, but still." Applejack took off her hat, holding it to her chest as she squinted, trying to see whatever it was that Twilight saw, or thought she saw. Where's Pinky and her pinky sense when you need her? Twilight grinned despite the situation. "I'm not sure she has a tick for mysterious lake ripples." Rarity narrowed her eyes as well. Then, as if struck by a sudden idea, she brought a hoof to her chin. "Wasn't there something in one of Trixie's letters about things not always being as they seemed?" That's just vague enough to apply to this situation," Twilight said. She relinquished her relentless gaze on the lake, turning to her friends. She shrugged. "I'm sure it's nothing. Like I said, it was probably just a fish or something." Applejack shrugged along with her, placing her hat back on her head. "If you say so, Sugar Cube." As she started to canter toward the lake, she said, "Well, since we're here, I'm going to go ahead and get some water too. I'm getting thirstier than an armadillo in a marathon." "Yes, I think I'll have a sip as well," Rarity added, following Applejack down. Just then, Twilight noticed that she too was feeling a bit dry in the mouth. Throwing caution to the wind, she followed the other ponies to the lake edge. As Spike and Rainbow Dash reached the water, dunking their heads in as soon as they did, Twilight stopped, seeing another, larger ripple in the lake. "Stop!" she shouted, halting Rarity and Applejack in their place. "I just saw something in the lake again." Rainbow Dash, unaware of Twilight's previous sighting, shouted back to her, "Oh, please, Twi. It's probably just some fish or something. What could possibly live in this lake that's dangerous?" She waved her hoof dismissively, leaning her head back toward the water. "You're just imagining things." As if simply to spite Rainbow Dash, the water suddenly began to churn with ripples in many places. With an explosive force, the water exploded as a dozen armored ponies leapt from the water and grabbed Rainbow Dash and Spike, holding sharp tridents to their throats. Rainbow Dash craned her neck to look up at her captor. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she groaned. Twilight's eyes went wide. She immediately used her magic to grab Applejack and Rarity, pulling them out of harm's way into her side. "Shoot! I guess you weren't seeing things, Twi," Applejack muttered. "This ain't looking so good." "Spike!" Rarity shouted, holding her hoof outwards to the squirming dragon. "Hold on!" "Always trust your instincts, Twilight. You should know that," Twilight thought, reprimanding herself. She eyed her friend's captors, noticing that they were not like normal ponies. Besides the armor and tridents, they also had long, scaled tails instead of rear legs, and seemed to have gills along their necks. "Sea ponies," she mumbled. Applejack danced nervously on the tips of her hooves, fumbling with a dozen ideas for what to do in her head. She turned to Twilight. "So, What now? Twilight's jaw went slack. She mouthed words, but no sounds came out. She finally said. I don't know. Applejack stared wide-eyed at her. Well, ain't that just great? Rarity snapped her head toward Applejack. Oh, you have an idea, then, she said a little more sarcastically than she had intended. Applejack nodded slowly, adjusting her hat a bit. Just one, she said. Kicking up some dirt with her right hind leg, she snorted, lowering her head. Charge! She let out a loose, loud cry and then sprinted forward, right toward the dozen armored sea ponies. Guess that's one idea, Twilight said, somewhat in shock. Rarity? She turned to see that Rarity had too begun charging toward the line of sea ponies with reckless abandon. Oh boy. This won't end well.